On a warm June afternoon in 1972, a young orderly named Andrew Thompson finished his shift at St. Mary's Hospital in Rochester, New York. He climbed onto his powder blue bicycle, adjusted his cap, and pedaled through quiet streets he knew by heart. 12 minutes. That's all it should have taken him to reach his small apartment. But Andrew never made it home. His sudden disappearance shook the entire community. For weeks, then months, then decades, his younger brother Michael searched relentlessly, posting flyers, retracing routes, knocking on doors. Detectives dismissed him. Neighbors speculated, and eventually the case was labeled cold. And yet, 30 years later, Michael stumbled across something hidden deep in the woods. It wasn't closure. It wasn't peace. It was evidence so disturbing, it rewrote everything Rochester thought it knew about Andrew's fate, revealing a darkness that had been hiding in plain sight for decades. Before we begin, if true crime mysteries and long-buried secrets fascinate you, make sure to hit like and subscribe. It helps us share forgotten stories like Andrew's. And drop a comment. Where are you watching from? The summer of 1972 in Rochester, New York, carried the kind of warmth that seemed endless. Streets lined with tall elms echoed with boys playing ball, while hard-working men pedaled bicycles home after long shifts. Gas cost only 36 cents a gallon, but not every man could afford a car. Bicycles were a common sight, their riders weaving through traffic with a sense of freedom that mirrored simpler times. In this quiet city, Andrew Thompson lived a modest life. 32 years old, he worked tirelessly at St. Mary's Hospital as an orderly, tending to patients with steady hands and a calm, reassuring presence. Andrew rented a small apartment on Elm Street just 2 miles from the hospital. Every morning he set out on his powder blue Schwinn bicycle, cap secured, a wicker basket carrying lunch and personal belongings. He dreamed of saving enough to buy a small house with a garden. Though unmarried, he was never truly alone. His patients, colleagues, and neighbors respected him as a dependable man of quiet strength. His closest bond, however, was with his younger brother, Michael. 3 years apart, they spoke weekly, never missing Tuesday evening calls. Their loyalty had carried them through tough childhood years after their father walked out. Michael often said Andrew was the good one, always generous, always reliable, never complaining. They met for coffee every Sunday morning, discussing work, news, and baseball. Andrew sometimes babysat Michael's sons, spoiling them with small hospital trinkets. On Monday, June 12, 1972, Andrew's day began like countless others. He reported for duty at 6:30 a.m., checked patients, administered medicine, and comforted families. Colleagues described him as calm but slightly weary that afternoon. Around 3 p.m., Andrew finished assisting with a young boy battling pneumonia. He stayed longer than scheduled to reassure the boy's father, promising to return during evening rounds. Compassion often kept him working late. By 3:15 p.m., Andrew finally clocked out. The hospital security guard remembered him retrieving his bicycle, waving politely. There was no sign of distress, nothing unusual. Just another ordinary day ending like so many before. Andrew's route was predictable. He'd pedal left onto Main Street, right onto Oak Avenue, then wind through quieter roads leading home. The trip took 12 minutes. It was considered safe, familiar, routine. At 3:30 p.m., a neighbor watering his lawn saw Andrew ride past, tipping his cap as he always did. He looked calm, even cheerful, as if nothing weighed on his mind. But somewhere between Oak Avenue and Elm Street, Andrew disappeared. His bicycle, his cap, his belongings, everything, vanished. The distance between the last sighting and his apartment was barely half a mile. By 6 p.m., Michael grew uneasy. Andrew always called after work to check in. That evening, the phone stayed silent. By 7:30, Michael drove across town to his brother's apartment. Inside, everything appeared in order. Andrew's bed was made. His uniform for the next day hung neatly in the closet. His alarm clock was set. Yet there was no sign he'd returned. The landlord hadn't seen him. The hospital confirmed he had left on time. With night settling in, Michael knew something was wrong. Andrew was dependable, structured. He would never simply vanish without explanation. At 8:45 p.m., Michael reported his brother missing to police. The desk sergeant dismissed his concerns, suggesting Andrew might have taken off voluntarily. Michael left the station frustrated, knowing his brother better than anyone else. For Michael, the clock had already started ticking. Every minute without answers felt heavier than the last. Somewhere in that half-mile stretch, his brother had slipped into the shadows, and nothing would ever be the same. Michael Thompson woke the next morning with a pit in his stomach. Andrew still hadn't called. The sun rose as usual, but nothing felt normal. He knew instinctively that something terrible had happened. Andrew was not the kind of man to vanish. He thrived on routine, always punctual, always dependable. Michael couldn't accept the idea that his brother had simply walked away from his life. Skipping work, Michael retraced Andrew's usual route. He stopped at shops, gas stations, and barber shops, asking questions, showing photographs. Most men shook their heads. Only one remembered Andrew riding past the day before. Michael plastered flyers on telephone poles. Missing, Andrew Thompson, 32. Last seen June 12th, riding a powder blue Schwinn. He carried a stack everywhere, pressing them into the hands of strangers, pleading for leads. His brother's face stared back at him from each flyer. A warm smile, sharp eyes, the expression of a man who cared deeply for others. Michael's heart ached, knowing this image might soon symbolize tragedy. At first, Michael's own friends urged patience. They repeated what the police had said. Maybe he needed space. Maybe he's with someone. Michael knew those words were hollow. Andrew would never abandon responsibility. By the second day, Andrew still hadn't appeared at the hospital. His colleagues grew concerned. They joined Michael in searching parks, wooded areas, and alleys. Dozens of men combed the neighborhood, but no trace was found. Michael's determination hardened. He spoke to every man who had known Andrew, co-workers, neighbors, shopkeepers. He carried a notebook, scribbling details, marking maps, building a timeline. If the police were slow, he would not be. Police Detective Frank Morrison eventually took the case, though reluctantly. He interviewed Andrew's acquaintances, but found no evidence of foul play. He still hinted Andrew had left voluntarily. Michael's frustration grew each day. Weeks passed. Rumors began circulating among locals. Some whispered Andrew had debts. Others claimed he had left town with a secret friend. Michael despised these theories, knowing his brother's character better than anyone else. He refused to entertain gossip. He focused only on facts. Andrew was reliable. Andrew was proud of his work. Andrew cared about his brother's children. A man like that didn't simply disappear willingly. Michael organized search parties from his home. Men from church, co-workers, and neighbors joined. They scoured fields, walked riversides, checked abandoned houses. Each false lead crushed Michael, but he refused to stop. He drove Andrew's bicycle route daily, slowing at every intersection, imagining what could have happened. Had someone forced him into a car? Did an accident occur unseen? The silence along those streets haunted him. Night after night, Michael sat awake at the kitchen table, maps spread across the surface, notes stacked high. His wife urged him to rest, but he couldn't. Sleep felt like betrayal. His sons asked about their uncle. "Where's Uncle Andrew?" they wondered. Michael promised he was searching, though inside, dread consumed him. He feared the truth was far darker than he dared admit aloud. By autumn, police attention drifted elsewhere. Michael's pleas grew desperate. He wrote letters to officials, contacted newspapers, begged for airtime on local radio. He would not allow Andrew's story to be forgotten. Some men began urging Michael to move on. But how could he? His brother had shared coffee with him every Sunday, laughed at baseball games, and carried loyalty through every season. Letting go was impossible. For Michael, devotion was a lifeline. Andrew wasn't just a missing man. He was his brother, his confidant, his anchor. and until the truth was unearthed, Michael would never, ever stop searching. By late summer of 1972, the urgency around Andrew's disappearance began to fade for the authorities. To them, he was just another missing adult. To Michael, every day without answers was agony. Detective Frank Morrison continued the investigation but showed little conviction. He interviewed Andrew's co-workers, neighbors, and acquaintances. All described him as reliable, friendly, and stable. None suggested he was troubled or planning to disappear. Michael sensed the detective's skepticism. Morrison hinted Andrew might have left voluntarily, chasing freedom or privacy. Michael bristled. His brother wasn't a drifter. He was steady, dependable, and deeply tied to the community. Witness accounts conflicted. A construction worker claimed Andrew spoke with a man in a dark sedan. A teenager swore he saw Andrew biking in another direction. Each account contradicted the others, creating confusion. The contradictions haunted Michael. He pored over timelines, trying to reconcile impossible sightings. How could so many men believe they saw Andrew that afternoon, yet none provide clarity? Memory, Michael realized, was a fragile thing. Police began to pull back resources. Newer crimes demanded attention. Andrew's file slid into a drawer marked open, but rarely touched. Michael felt abandoned not just by the system, but by men sworn to protect. Despite the official slowdown, the community rallied. Dozens of Andrew's colleagues joined weekend searches. Young men from local schools helped scour parks. Church groups prayed openly for his safe return. The city hadn't forgotten. Michael marked each searched location on a map. Red ink slashed across parks, riverbanks, and alleys. Yet the spaces left unmarked only grew. Rochester seemed endless, and Andrew had vanished into its shadows. Tips continued trickling in. A bus driver claimed Andrew boarded a Greyhound. A store clerk swore he saw Andrew days later. Each tip raised hope, then ended in disappointment, gnawing away at Michael's spirit. Rumors multiplied. Some men said Andrew had fallen in with criminals. Others suggested mental collapse. Whispers spread like smoke, damaging Andrew's reputation. Michael fought back fiercely, insisting his brother was no deserter or madman. The rumors hardened Michael's resolve. He avoided gatherings where idle talk sullied Andrew's name. He focused only on truth. Each careless rumor felt like betrayal, striking at Andrew's character, which Michael defended relentlessly. By autumn, Morrison exhausted conventional methods. Andrew's bank account remained untouched. His apartment showed no hasty departure. Records revealed no history of instability. Yet without physical evidence, the detective had nothing solid to pursue. Michael hired a private investigator named Robert Chen, a retired officer. Chen interviewed witnesses anew, retraced routes, and studied evidence. But weeks later, he admitted the same dead end. The trail was frozen. Desperate, Michael even visited psychics recommended by other men with missing brothers. Most spoke vague nonsense. One claimed Andrew was near water, trapped in darkness. Michael left shaken, but still searching for hope. The strain was immense. Michael's marriage began to fray. Nights spent mapping and searching wore him down. His children grew distant, confused why their father obsessed over a case others had abandoned. Still, Michael refused to relent. He visited Andrew's apartment weekly, watering plants, dusting shelves, preserving everything as it was. Uniforms hung neatly in the closet. Books remained stacked by the bed. Nothing changed. For many, the case became a fading memory. For Michael, it was a wound that never closed. Each passing day without his brother's return only deepened his obsession to find truth. By winter, Andrew's disappearance had joined the city's unsolved mysteries. But unlike most, this one had a relentless guardian. Michael would not let his brother fade into silence. The search was far from over. The years rolled on, but Andrew's absence never loosened its grip on Michael. Each birthday, each holiday, each Sunday morning without his brother carved deeper lines into his face, and heavier shadows under his eyes. Michael's home remained filled with reminders. Andrew's photograph stood framed on the mantel. His bicycle route map, marked with fading ink, stayed pinned above the kitchen table. Michael's obsession refused to fade with time. His sons grew older, started careers, built lives of their own. Yet they always felt their father's lingering sorrow. They knew their uncle not through presence, but through stories retold countless times. Michael's marriage strained under the weight of unending grief. His wife urged him to let go, to live in the present. But Michael could not. Abandoning Andrew felt like betraying his brother's memory. The police file gathered dust in storage. New detectives inherited it, glanced through its yellowed pages, then moved on. For them, it was unsolvable. For Michael, it was a wound that still bled. Every few months, Michael walked Andrew's route again. The city changed, old houses demolished, new shops rising, but Michael's eyes searched for anything overlooked. Each step carried both hope and despair in equal measure. By the late 1980s, Rochester looked unrecognizable compared to Andrew's last ride. Highways carved new paths, factories closed, neighborhoods shifted. Yet Michael clung to his brother's memory as if preserving an earlier world. Friends urged him to move forward. Some called him obsessed. Others quietly admired his loyalty but questioned his health. Michael didn't care. His mission was unshakable, to discover what happened that summer afternoon. He kept Andrew's apartment intact for years, paying rent long after logic said otherwise. Dust settled, paint cracked, but inside, Andrew's presence lingered. It became both shrine and prison for Michael's grief. Each anniversary of Andrew's disappearance, Michael lit a candle in church. Some men joined him, others stayed silent. But Michael prayed alone, whispering promises that he would never give up. Never. By the 1990s, the world moved faster. Computers, cell phones, and modern conveniences swept through society. Yet Andrew's case remained untouched by time, frozen in an age of bicycles and tree-lined neighborhoods. Michael aged into his 50s, his once dark hair streaked with gray. His search became quieter, less frantic, but more determined. He was no longer fueled by hope, but by duty. He built scrapbooks filled with newspaper clippings, flyers, letters, and hand-drawn maps. Each page documented a journey of pain and persistence. His sons sometimes helped, though they couldn't fully understand their father's burden. Some nights, Michael sat alone, writing letters to Andrew as though he might somehow read them. He described his life, his sons, his struggles. These letters filled shoeboxes, stacked high in closets. Though decades passed, Michael never stopped speaking Andrew's name. He told neighbors, co-workers, and strangers about his brother. Keeping the story alive was his way of defying the silence others had accepted. In 2002, after a painful divorce, Michael returned to Rochester. His children were grown, his marriage gone, but his mission remained. Now, older and weary, he stepped back into the city of ghosts. The streets had changed, but his determination had not. 30 years of silence had not dimmed the question burning inside him. Somewhere out there, the truth about Andrew was waiting to be found. And Michael was prepared to chase it, no matter how many shadows he had to walk through to finally uncover it. For him, 30 years meant nothing compared to a brother's bond. In October 2002, Michael decided to retrace Andrew's final route once more. Decades had passed, the city had changed, but the path remained etched in his memory like an unhealed scar. The hospital looked different, modernized with new wings and glass fronts, yet Michael could still picture Andrew walking out, cap adjusted, mounting his bicycle. That image haunted him with every step he took. He followed Main Street, turned onto Oak Avenue, and felt time folding backward. Though traffic roared louder and sidewalks were cracked, he could almost hear the soft rattle of Andrew's bicycle chain echoing. Michael's eyes caught a wooded area that hadn't existed back in 1972. Development had shifted land use, creating parks where factories once stood. Something about this place tugged at his instincts. Venturing down a narrow trail, half hidden by weeds, Michael felt unease gnawing at him. The trail seemed older than the official paths, as though it had existed long before the park was built. The air grew still as he moved deeper into the trees. Then he saw it. Rusted metal, tangled in vines, half buried under decades of leaves. A bicycle. Powder blue. His heart stopped. Michael fell to his knees, pulling at vines and dirt with trembling hands. The wicker basket, broken and rotted, still clung to the handlebars. Even in decay, it looked hauntingly familiar. Every detail screamed recognition. The faded frame, the curved seat, the worn pedals. Michael remembered Andrew's pride in maintaining that bike. His breath caught as he realized he was staring at his brother's bicycle. Desperate for proof, he searched the frame for the serial number. Rust concealed most of it, but near the pedals he uncovered faint markings, numbers, letters. He compared them to his old notes. The sequence matched exactly. It was Andrew's bicycle. After 30 years of silence, Michael finally held a tangible piece of truth. The past was no longer lost. Evidence had resurfaced. Shaking, he dialed the police. Detective Lisa Rodriguez arrived swiftly, documenting the scene. Photographs were taken, soil samples collected, vegetation studied. After decades of emptiness, Andrew's case was suddenly alive again. Michael watched officers carry the bicycle away carefully. Vines had grown through the spokes, confirming it had been there for decades. This was no recent plant. It was the first real evidence in 30 years. Detective Rodriguez promised to review the case files, compare records, and follow new leads. Her seriousness gave Michael a flicker of hope. For the first time in years, he wasn't alone in his fight. The bicycle's discovery spread through local media. Headlines proclaimed a breakthrough in one of Rochester's coldest mysteries. Old neighbors called Michael, voices trembling, recalling the day Andrew vanished, grateful someone still cared enough to search. But the discovery raised darker questions. Why was the bicycle hidden here? Who had left it? Where was Andrew's body? For Michael, the answers felt closer than ever, yet unbearably out of reach. That night, Michael sat awake staring at Andrew's photograph. The discovery gave him proof, but not closure. If anything, it reopened wounds that had hardened with time, demanding answers he still did not have. Finding the bicycle meant Andrew had been taken. It wasn't abandonment. It wasn't voluntary disappearance. It was something far worse, and Michael was determined to uncover the truth, no matter where it led. The woods whispered secrets in silence. For 30 years they had hidden his brother's bicycle. Now, Michael believed they held much more. Somewhere in those shadows, the story of Andrew's fate waited to be unearthed. Detective Rodriguez began digging through property records, searching for connections near the wooded lot where Andrew's bicycle was found. The land had once belonged to a man named Walter Brennan, a name that soon chilled Michael. Brennan had owned the property from the late 1960s until the mid-1980s. Neighbors remembered him as reclusive, territorial, and unsettling. He lived alone in a small house, rarely speaking, but always watching. Police files revealed Brennan had worked as a maintenance supervisor at Riverside State Hospital, a mental health facility that shut down in 1969. His employment record was marred by disturbing complaints of misconduct. Former staff recalled Brennan lurking in hallways, entering rooms uninvited, making inappropriate comments toward younger men. Several complaints were filed, but the institution closed before any serious action could be taken. Even more unsettling, multiple patients disappeared during Brennan's tenure. Officially, they were listed as voluntary departures, but colleagues remembered these men as too impaired to simply walk away. Their vanishings were never explained. The coincidences mounted. Brennan lived near Andrew's route. He owned the very woods where the bicycle was discovered. He had a history of predatory behavior. The pattern seemed undeniable, though Brennan himself was long dead. Michael felt rage boil inside him. For decades, this man had hidden in plain sight, protected by silence and bureaucracy. Now, evidence suggested Andrew's disappearance wasn't random. It was part of something sinister. Detective Rodriguez pressed further. Records showed Brennan had also been questioned in 2 other disappearances from nearby towns during the late 1960s. Both victims were young men. Both cases remained unsolved. Neighbors recalled Brennan's nocturnal habits. He often worked late, returning at odd hours. He posted no trespassing signs, discouraging anyone from stepping near his land. Yet some remembered glimpses of him watching young men pass. Michael felt sick reading these reports. It wasn't just Andrew. There might have been others, countless others. Brennan's land could be more than a hiding place for a bicycle. It could be a graveyard of secrets. But the investigation met resistance. City officials hesitated to reopen such an old case tied to a dead man. Archived files from Riverside Hospital had mysteriously disappeared or were heavily redacted, blocking Rodriguez's progress. Michael sensed institutions wanted the truth buried. Admitting failures from decades past risked reputations. For them, it was easier to let the mystery remain unsolved than acknowledge a predator was ignored. Anonymous calls warned Rodriguez to drop the pursuit, but she pressed on, quietly sharing details with Michael. He knew the fight was no longer just about Andrew. It was about justice for all forgotten victims. Michael began his own research. At libraries, he scoured newspapers for missing men. Patterns emerged. Similar ages, similar disappearances, often in areas linked to Brennan's properties. The evidence felt damning, even without an active suspect. He mapped these vanishings across counties, finding disturbing overlaps. Brennan had moved between properties, and wherever he went, young men disappeared. The scale of it all chilled Michael to his core. For 3 decades, he had imagined Andrew's fate in isolation. Now he saw a larger darkness. His brother was likely one of many, targeted by a man who stalked with patience and precision. Walter Brennan was gone, buried since 1995. But his shadow remained, and Michael was determined to drag that shadow into the light, no matter how deep he had to dig. The bicycle was only the beginning. Somewhere in those woods, Michael believed, Brennan had left more behind. And Michael would stop at nothing until every secret was uncovered, every truth brought into daylight. Michael returned to the wooded property armed with old maps he uncovered at the library. They showed boundaries stretching beyond the park. He suspected forgotten structures once stood there, now hidden beneath decades of change. Venturing deeper, Michael discovered the cracked foundation of an old maintenance shed. Rusted tools, metal scraps, and rotted wood littered the ground. It was Brennan's domain, a place that seemed heavy with unspoken history. Near the foundation, Michael noticed disturbed soil, long since overgrown. Instinct told him to dig. With a small trowel, he scraped at the earth until metal struck his blade with a hollow, echoing sound. He unearthed a rusted box about the size of a shoebox, sealed with a corroded latch. Michael's pulse thundered as he pried it open. Inside lay objects that froze his blood: driver's licenses, old photographs, jewelry. All belonged to men who had vanished between the late 1960s and 1970s. Among them was a surveillance-style photo of Andrew, dated just days before his disappearance. The photos were chilling. Young men unaware they were being watched, captured while walking, shopping, biking, faces full of life, frozen forever in grainy black and white images. Brennan had stalked them, cataloged them, hunted them. Michael recognized landmarks in the backgrounds: streets, storefronts, even St. Mary's Hospital. This wasn't chance. Brennan had tracked his brother's daily routines with methodical precision. Andrew was part of a pattern, not a random victim. 7 licenses in total were inside the box. Michael cross-referenced them with missing person cases. 5 matched unsolved disappearances, each young men from nearby counties. The other 2 were names Michael didn't yet recognize. Also inside were personal items: a college ring, a hospital badge, cufflinks, and a broken watch. Each piece was a trophy, taken to preserve memory of Brennan's twisted victories. Michael called Detective Rodriguez immediately. When she arrived, her face paled at the sight. The evidence was undeniable. This wasn't just one missing man, it was proof of a predator spanning nearly a decade. Yet bureaucracy complicated everything. Jurisdiction stretched across counties. Some victims belonged to other precincts. Files were incomplete, misplaced, or lost entirely. Rodriguez warned Michael that the investigation might stall again, despite the horrifying evidence. Michael's frustration boiled. How could officials ignore this? He contacted local news, revealing the discovery publicly. Soon headlines blared: "Cold case breakthrough, hidden box links, disappearances to possible serial predator." Rochester was forced to pay attention. Calls flooded in. Older residents remembered Brennan's strange behavior. Former neighbors admitted he watched boys pass his property. Others recalled police questioning him briefly, only to drop interest when alibis couldn't be disproved. Michael's interview aired on television. Holding Andrew's photo, he explained the discovery. His voice cracked but remained steady. "My brother wasn't alone. Many men were taken. We deserve answers, even if justice comes too late." The exposure brought backlash. City officials worried about reputation. Police were criticized for mishandling early investigations. Some files had even disappeared mysteriously, suggesting evidence may have been buried intentionally to protect institutions. But Michael pressed forward. Fearless now, he returned to the woods often, convinced more remained hidden. Each shadow felt alive, each rusted scrap a potential clue. He wasn't chasing closure anymore, he was chasing truth. Every discovery deepened the horror but also strengthened his resolve. Andrew's disappearance wasn't just a tragedy, it was part of a web of suffering spun by one man, shielded by silence. Michael would rip that web apart. Somewhere beneath the soil, Michael believed more victims' stories waited. The box was only a doorway, and once opened, such doors can never be closed again. Truth was loose, and it demanded to be faced. Michael pieced together the grim puzzle. Brennan had stalked Andrew, photographed his routines, then struck with calculated precision. The bicycle hidden in the woods, the buried box, the trophies, all painted the portrait of a predator. But Brennan had died in 1995, taking his secrets to the grave. Michael realized the man responsible for Andrew's disappearance would never stand trial, never confess, never face the justice he deserved. The statute of limitations had expired for many crimes. Other suspects and witnesses were either deceased or too frail to testify. For prosecutors, the case was more history than solvable crime. Michael found himself holding answers, yet denied resolution. He had uncovered truth, but truth alone could not deliver justice. It felt like winning a war after the enemy was already gone. Still, his efforts mattered. Families of other missing men came forward, finding in Michael's discoveries the closure they had lacked for decades. Andrew's case had unearthed hidden wounds far beyond Rochester. Detective Rodriguez admitted the system had failed. Records lost, leads ignored, institutions prioritizing reputation over justice. Michael saw firsthand how bureaucracy had sheltered Brennan's crimes and allowed suffering to stretch across generations. The realization haunted him. If Andrew's bicycle had never been discovered, the truth might have remained buried forever. How many other predators had escaped exposure because no one refused to stop searching? Despite the horror, Michael established a foundation for families of missing men. He raised funds, lobbied officials, and advocated for changes to cold case procedures. He turned grief into relentless purpose. He pushed legislators to extend statutes of limitations for violent crimes, to preserve records more carefully, and to reopen investigations when new evidence appeared. He vowed Andrew's story would fuel systemic change. On his mantle, Andrew's photograph remained framed in silver. For decades, it represented questions. Now, it symbolized answers. Terrible ones, yes, but answers nonetheless. Michael could finally look at it without suffocating uncertainty. The knowledge brought pain, but also release. 30 years of silence ended with a truth no one wanted to face. Andrew had been hunted, taken, and erased. Yet his memory endured. Michael often returned to the wooded clearing where the bicycle had been found. Standing beneath towering oaks, he whispered to his brother. He had fulfilled his promise. He never stopped searching. The woods were quiet now, but Michael felt the shadows still lingered. Brennan was gone, but his darkness left scars on Rochester that would never fully heal. The truth remained embedded in its soil. Reporters sometimes asked Michael whether knowing was better than not knowing. He always answered the same. Knowing hurts, but silence hurts more. At least now, I can face the truth head-on. In his later years, Michael became a mentor to other men who refused to give up on missing brothers, fathers, and sons. He taught them persistence, patience, and the cost of carrying hope. Though justice never came in courtrooms, Michael believed justice lived in truth. He had shattered the silence, exposed the predator, and ensured Andrew's story would never again fade into whispers. Andrew's disappearance had started as one man's tragedy. It ended as a revelation of systemic failure and hidden crimes. The bicycle in the woods was more than evidence. It was a doorway to buried darkness. And once Michael opened that door, there was no turning back. Some truths never deliver justice, but they still demand to be told. Andrew's voice, though stolen, would echo forever through his brother's fight.